All right, welcome to the Johnson Marquez podcast. Today we're covering the temporary injunction. With me today is one of our associates, Heather Coleman.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Today's topic, the temporary injunction. What exactly is that?
So the temporary or automatic injunction is something that goes into place in any initial divorce or custody proceeding. It's more applicable in a divorce, I would say. But as soon as the opposing party is served, an automatic injunction is going to go into place. That kind of lays out some ground rules for how the case, basically things the court does not want you to do while the case is pending.
Yeah, and this is different than, some people hear the word injunction or something like that and they think about, a protection order or restraining order, right? This is actually intended to lock in the status quo.
Mm-hmm. That is exactly what the court wants while your case is pending. They want the status quo to remain in place. So basically, the automatic injunction covers a few things. The first thing is that neither party can hide, encumber, conceal assets. So that essentially means you need to just spend the way you have been spending. Don't go out and buy a boat. Don't go out and liquidate all of your assets. One other thing that's covered is that neither party can remove the children from the state without agreement or court order. So basically, don't take off with your kids to Mexico and don't come back. Also, not to harass the other party. So do not disturb the peace of the other party. This is important because a lot of times people maybe do feel inclined to lash out. It's designed to prevent that. And then the last thing of the automatic injunction is to make sure that insurance policies do not lapse or cancel.
Okay, so there's a lot of do not do this, do not do that as part of the automatic injunction, but there's also the whole make sure you keep doing blankety blank. Like whoever's paying the mortgage got to keep paying the mortgage. Whoever's
Right.
paying the car insurance got to keep paying the car insurance. Can't go cancel somebody's health insurance. Got to keep paying the health insurance, right? So not only are there a lot of prohibitions that are implied and contained in the automatic injunction, but there's also a lot of affirmative duties that you have to continue to follow. Things that you're doing during the life of that injunction, right?
Yeah. So just because the divorce has been filed doesn't mean that everything is going to change. Things are going to stay the way they have been while the divorce is pending, unless there's an agreement otherwise. So, if you've been paying the mortgage, you need to continue doing that. You can't take the children out of states without an agreement or court order. So this doesn't often become an issue. You can easily agree that, hey, the kids were going to go to Mexico for spring break. And if you agree, that's fine. But basically, the court wants everyone to keep the status quo to minimize conflict during the divorce.
And I mean, when I first started, the automatic injunction was something you had to go ask for. You had to try and get something put into place by the judge early on. This happens automatically, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's listed on both the summons and petition. So they really want you to see it. They want you to read it, and they want you to know that you have to maintain the status quo while your divorce is pending.
Okay. And so the judge doesn't need to sign off on this?
It is automatic once you're served with those documents, or if you guys file together, or if you sign a waiver of service, that injunction is going to go into place.
Now, this was put into place to stop a lot of behavior that people do anyway. Even though there's an injunction in place, they go ahead and do it. But let's talk about some common examples of what people do and what the injunction is intended to stop or penalize them for doing. Sometimes what I've seen is as soon as a party finds out that there's a divorce, they go and they clear out the bank accounts,
Mm-hmm.
right? They cancel the health insurance. There's a lot of vindictive type of behavior that's triggered when people first file, right?
Right. And I'd say, insurance is probably one of the biggest ones. Once somebody's filed for divorce, you may be thinking, well, I'm not going to keep them on my health insurance. I got enrollment coming up. I'm going to take the wife off. Well, you can't do that. At least while your divorce is pending, you need to keep things the way they have been. So that's a pretty common one. Trying to clear out bank accounts. I mean, that's definitely a big no-no. And the bottom line is that if you do try to do these things and maybe you do successfully do them at first, it'll come back to hurt you later.
Yeah, I mean, clearing out the bank account. People think that if they just go grab that $100,000 out of that account and put it into a new account, or maybe even try and hide it overseas or something, that they're safe.
Yeah, and that's not a good assumption to make. Even if you do take, for example, $100,000 hide it somewhere, give it to your brother, something like that, the court's going to act like it's still there and it will still need to be allocated.
Right. I mean, if you have a bank account and you put it all and you get served with a divorce and you freak out and you're like, it's none of this money belongs to him and I'm going to go hide it. You clear out your family savings account. It's got $500,000 in it. You load it up into a, carry-on and you fly off to Madrid or something and put it in the bank. You're not safe. That $500,000 is coming back, isn't it?
Yeah, it's coming back. Whatever was there when the divorce was first filed, that's what the court is going to assume is going to be there when they're allocating assets and debts.
Yeah, I mean, because they're going to see the bank account where the $500,000 came out of.
Yeah, and I mean, it's quite frankly, it's pretty easy to trace where money is going. So if when you exchange financial disclosures, you're going through bank statements, you see, a lot of transfers to another account, and this account wasn't disclosed, you're going to have to disclose that account. Eventually, people will find out where the money went.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we don't find out on some cases where maybe it's really well done, but the cases that we do find out about, or the judge does find out about, the penalty is pretty stiff.
Yeah, I mean, judges hate when people violate the automatic injunction. They hate when people, aren't playing nicely. And if you decide that you're going to hide a bunch of money, there's a good chance that more than half of that money, or possibly all of that money, is going to go to your spouse, just as a punishment or sanction for violating the automatic injunction.
Yeah, I mean, the way that typically works is everybody just kind of assumes that Colorado is a 50-50 state. It's not. It's an equitable division state. That typically means that courts will consider everything to be joint and even, but in situations where the judge finds out that you've been hiding assets, like you said, sometimes the judge is just going to award all of that. If you've been tinkering with the injunction and hiding assets, then the judge may give your spouse 100% of the account that you were trying to hide, right?
Yeah, because it boils down to what's equitable. So if everyone's playing nicely, most likely what's equitable is splitting everything 50-50. But if somebody decides to start hiding assets that are later discovered, the equitable thing to do could be to allocate 100% to your spouse.
Right. Okay, so you're going to file for divorce. It's going to be your choice. You just haven't figured out when to file for it. What happens if you go, all right, well, I haven't filed yet. There's no injunction. I'm going to take that $100,000 right now and go spend it. I'm going to go on a nice, wonderful vacation south of France, get a nice villa. What happens with that if it happens before the injunction?
So yeah, that's also a bad idea. You can't go and spend a bunch of money right before you file, because the court is going to assume that you've dissipated marital assets in anticipation of divorce. So it's basically the exact same thing as violating the automatic injunction. Even
though the injunction hasn't been put into place yet.
Yeah.
And the same logic goes if I know that I'm going to file for a divorce in 2 months, so I use that 2 months to shuffle money off to Costa Rica or something, doesn't matter. It's still marital money sitting in Costa Rica, right?
Yep.
So it's always a bad idea to try and mess around with that injunction. But there are legitimate things you can do in advance of a divorce, filing for a divorce, that don't violate the injunction, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, if you really want to focus on what you're doing in the ordinary course of business. So if you guys had an agreement that you were going to refinance the house, go ahead and do so. But you can't go do something that you wouldn't normally do, and that otherwise it's going to come back to haunt you.
Yeah. So, for example, paying attorney's fees, that would not be a violation of the injunction. Like somebody needs to post the retainer to file the divorce. They're basically segregating out some fee or some of the marital estate to handle their needs, right? Mm-hmm. That they've never had to pay before. So this is a new expense, big expense, done in anticipation of a divorce, but it doesn't violate the injunction.
Yeah.
Same thing would go like if they need to move out and get their own place, right?
Yeah, and I mean, that's the unfortunate reality of divorcing, is that oftentimes you will have just separated, or maybe you've been separated for a couple months. But it's expected that each party's going to have to pay their own living expenses if they've separated. So that's, that wouldn't be considered a violation of the injunction.
Right. Because it goes back to your reasonable needs. Mm-hmm. And what those reasonable needs can vary from couple to couple, right? I mean, some people, they live that first class lifestyle, and their reasonable needs are, include a monthly trip or something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's reasonable needs are going to be different. If you are wealthy and do live an extravagant lifestyle and you do take, monthly vacations, you don't necessarily have to stop doing so if that was the lifestyle during the marriage. But if that wasn't the lifestyle during the marriage, then, I wouldn't recommend going out and getting a villa in France for the next month.
Right. The injunction, in my experience, it's helpful. It stops most of the shenanigans that can start, that people do at the beginning of divorce, just as an emotional reaction.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an understandable reaction that people have when they first get served with a divorce. They're angry. They sometimes lash out, and sometimes they do stupid things like this. But then it's up to the judge to enforce the injunction. And my experience has been that is not really consistent. That enforcement is not consistent across the board with all the judges.
Yeah, unfortunately, if there is a violation of the automatic injunction, it's, you're not looking at a situation where the other party is going to be penalized right away. You're going to have to bring it to the court's attention. This issue is going to have to work itself up to the judge, and judges will respond to it differently. You might get a judge who is maybe not that great and says, well, you did violate the automatic injunction, but oh well. Or
Right.
You could get a judge who's good and say, okay, this was bad, you need to be sanctioned.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely been involved in cases where very good lawyers have allowed their clients, I guess, to play shenanigans, play games with that injunction, including, cutting off access to bank accounts,
Mm-hmm.
Because they claim that the person is using the bank accounts unreasonably, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is basically a violation of the injunction to do something like that, to make the unilateral decision that these expenses exceed the reasonable needs of the other party.
Right.
Your action going off and cutting them out of the bank account violates the injunction. But getting a judge to enforce that injunction can really be difficult. I mean, what are your options? What can you do with that judge?
Right. I mean, I guess there's a couple different ways to pursue getting a violation of the automatic injunction in front of a judge. Violating the automatic injunction, it's contempt of court. It's a court order that you've knowingly violated. You can always go the contempt route. You could file a forthwith motion to enforce the automatic injunction. You could file a motion to expand the automatic injunction. There's a lot of ways to try to get it to the court's attention. It's typically up to you and your attorney to decide which route makes the most sense in your unique situation.
Right. I mean, there are a lot of factors that go into deciding which one of those routes, right? I mean, you got to look at who's your judge. What did they say? What's your history with this judge? How bad is this issue? How injured is your client? How urgent is this situation? How much money can you direct toward this violation? Because some people just don't have money to contest it. They just can't pay their lawyer to go file a contempt citation, right?
Right.
So these sorts of things all go into whether you react to a violation of the injunction and to what extent you react to a violation of the injunction, right?
Yeah. So, you really want to sit down with your attorney and talk about, what the violation is, really how much it would cost to pursue it versus how much, the cost of what has been violated. If it's too much to pursue, you might want to leave that issue up to mediation and not pursue basically a mid-case contempt if it's just really not going to be worth it.
Right. And those two options, the motion for contempt citation and then also a motion to enforce, two different ways of handling it. The anticipated resolution is faster with a motion to enforce, right?
Yeah, I would say so. With contempt, you're looking at filing the contempt, getting your spouse served, having a hearing on advisements when they are going to plead guilty or not guilty, and then ultimately you'll get to a contempt hearing. So contempt, it can take a while to work its way to a judge.
Right. Yeah, especially when you're after what would be called remedial contempt, and the remedy for it is something you need really pretty quick. Sitting around waiting for a contempt citation to get through the court, get in front of a judge to the point where you're arguing your case, that could seriously take 3, 4, 5 months.
Mm-hmm. And by then, God, you could have
the remedy's useless.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so a motion to enforce oftentimes is not, in my opinion, is not as powerful or I guess intimidating as a motion for a contempt citation, but it's also quicker and it may be less expensive in some situations, right?
Yeah, and it could certainly be quicker if you bring it to the court's attention by basically labeling it an emergency motion.
Right. So other thoughts on the automatic injunction? What advice do you give to clients on following that injunction?
Yeah, I mean, right away, I always point clients to the automatic injunction. When they're coming in to sign their petition, I go through the automatic injunction with them because it is really important. A lot of people don't really know what to expect when a divorce is starting. Like, okay, can I do this? Can I do that? And the automatic injunction is a really good guideline. Like, basically, you need to keep the status quo. You need to do what you've been doing. If issues come up, we'll deal with them as the case goes on, but for now, just keep things the way they have been.
Yeah, and I tell them, look, this is not a fight you want to have. It is, you don't want to get crossways with the judge right off the bat. I mean, it's really important to maintain your credibility and your integrity in front of the judge when you go there. And so violation of the injunction is just a really bad way to start off the case. But there's also the emotional damage that's done to the case, because if you drive that temperature up by canceling health insurance or by clearing out a bank account, the other side is really not going to like you very much, is not going to want to settle this case, is going to want to get even, is going to want to make you pay. And you've just set the temperature so high that it's going to be a long time before it can be pulled back down, right?
Yeah, violating the injunction just it gets things off to a bad start, right away. The judge isn't going to like you. They're not going to believe what you say, so you've lost your credibility with the judge. You've lost possibly a chance to, settle the case in an amicable fashion, because then the other side is going to be angry that you're not following the rules. And if you're not going to follow the rules, they're not going to play nice with you. Right.
Yeah. So the injunction is just not something to mess with. It's something that we should look at as a positive tool to keep the temperature down on these cases, to lock everybody into a pattern of behavior that can get us through till the end of the case. And I think good lawyers do exactly what you said, which is advise the client to, strictly abide by the injunction and not to play games with it.
Yeah.
All right. Any other thoughts?
I guess I just can't stress enough how important it is to keep the status quo while your divorce is pending. And if you do that, if both sides do that, which, typically people, they want to follow the rules. It'll help things tremendously. It'll help smooth things out.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, that's it for us today. Thank you very much, Heather. And we'll see you next week.
All right. We'll see you then.